Welcome to Trust the Journey. I'm Melanie Curtis.
And I'm Jason Moletsky.
Thank you, legit, for joining us today.
Yeah, our mission is living and learning, laughing and loving together with you.
We're here to grow and contribute through our practice of openness, honesty, vulnerability, humility, and trust, trusting the entire journey.
Yeah, and on that journey, we often talk about plant medicines, psychedelics, and other avenues of healing. When we do, we are sharing for informational purposes only. We're not doctors or therapists, and we don't promote doing anything illegal.
Inside us all, we have a deep, powerful knowing. We encourage curiosity, healing, and exploration of this consciousness.
Damn straight. Together, our handle is trustthejourney.today. Individually, you can find her at melaniecurtis.com and me at jasonmoletsky.com.
Thank you all again so much for being with us. On to the show. On today's episode, we have Yvette Vexta. We're fired up to welcome her to the show. Better known by her nom de plume, Vexta, Yvette Vexta is an autodidactic, multidisciplinary artist from Sydney, Australia, now based in New York City. Her career started in Melbourne in the mid-2000s as one of the first female street artists of the street art and graffiti movement. Her artwork has evolved since her illegal graffiti days into her uniquely bold and colorful aesthetic, aimed through a psychedelic lens to investigate our connection to the natural world. Through this lens, she explores themes of mythology, cosmology, and consciousness, while keeping her feet firmly rooted in deep ecology. Exploring the personal within universal mythopoetic archetypes, her work often enmeshes figurative forms amid her symbolic geometric shapes with floral, fungi, and coral patterns on the macro and micro levels. Ooh, dang, nice stuff. Vexta's work, in her time here on Earth, provides insight into our fundamental engagement with the modern human condition as connected/disconnected to the natural world and thus our inner selves. Her practice has grown from murals and paintings to hosting events, immersive experiences, and digital art, as well as practicing as a transformative coach with a focus on plant medicine. She collaborates with a diverse range of commercial clients such as Visa, the Olympics, Converse, Lollapalooza, the Governor's Ball and Music Festival, Fabergé, Urban Decay, Sports Girl, Juxtapose Magazine, and Samsung. Most days, she can be found working out of her studio on the 69th floor of the prestigious World Trade Center in New York City as an artist in residence. When she is not in the studio, she can be found out in nature, meditating, or cooking delicious meals for her friends. Vexta, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We are so happy to have you here. So happy to have you here. I am really excited about our conversation today because we are aligned on so many things, you and I. I've just basically felt like very fast friends, very just obvious connection. Art, I'm an art lover, but just pushing the edge, coaching, connection, psychedelic, self-expression, just so many things that we have touch points on. So it's I have a million questions I want to ask. Hopefully we'll have enough time. But I want to start personally with your art career, only because I feel like there are so many artists out there that are these really creatively self-expressed and wanting to do more with an art career. And it's a very difficult space. And so I was kind of wanted to hear your story. How did you get there? Which might be way too long of a question, but maybe start with that part of your story.
Yeah, I'm always where do I begin that story?
Yeah.
Is it when I first started making art as a child or,
Yeah, sure. Tell us, what were you like as a kid? For sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I was always making art as a child. As soon as I could hold a pencil, I was drawing, and that's what my mom would give me to entertain myself. And so when I really decided that the creative path was the path for me, it felt like that felt like a big aha moment where I was like, oh, this was the thing that I always loved and that I was always good at. And that I was like, I was like making little books when I was like 4 years old, being like, yes, this is my first publishing, you know?
Yeah.
So it felt like a kind of shedding of a lot of like programming or learnt stuff that I was like, oh, I'm going back to like a kind of a source within myself. But yeah, in terms of, I guess, being a part of like the street art and graffiti movement, that's how I ended up with an art career. I knew that that's what I wanted. It took me a while to get there though. So yeah, I don't know if that's
Yeah, well,
a
tell
starting
us
point.
more about that. I mean, I thought in your bio that the illegal parts of your career is like, that's kind of exciting and curious, right? That's the notion of this edge pushing. What was that? What were you doing that was so out of bounds that you made a name for yourself or whatever? Like, tell us more what that actually was.
Yeah, so I did a lot of social activism in my early 20s. And I was really passionate about making the world a better place, looking after the environment, Mother Earth, forestry, learning about that stuff, feeling very deeply connected to the natural world and wanting to highlight our connection to it. And I was doing social activism and, like throwing myself in front of bulldozers in forestry coops and things like this. But also realizing it wasn't really my skill set, that I wasn't a scientist, I wasn't a biologist. I was a pretty good organizer. I was good at communicating and creativity. So, when I was living in Melbourne at the time and when stencil art and graffiti on the streets, that was kind of a crossover point between like traditional graffiti and this more kind of like traditional art style but put on the street started to happen, I got super excited and I was like, this really lights me up. Like, I want to be a part of this. This is what's happening here. I want to do this. So yeah, I just started going out and putting some work up on the streets, thinking that there was like, I don't know, I thought there was like 20, 30, 40 people kind of running around Melbourne doing this. And through a couple of friends, I sort of found out it wasn't that many people. I was introduced to some of the artists that were doing it. We started like, painting illegally in abandoned buildings, putting on illegal exhibitions, self-organizing together. And, I think that the art world started to notice because we would have like queues going down the block, like 2 blocks long for exhibitions. And meanwhile, galleries are like, wait, what's happening there?
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to jump in here really quick. First of all, let me say I'm a huge fan of street art. I've been fortunate in my life to travel the world vastly. And one of the things that I deeply appreciate on my travels is being exposed to what I feel like is the truth of the culture through the street art in the different urban centers. And I've been just floored at the beauty, the stunning, and just it stopped me in my tracks pieces that I've encountered, in places like Colombia, like Bogota, or in Germany. And just there's this range between kind of the quickest, dirtiest kind of, it's almost like an angry, like a tag, right? Just the sloppiest tag, to the most beautiful large scale murals, to the kind of like the Banksy's type of, really revered type of works, right? So where did you place yourself in this spectrum? Like, what was your voice about when you started this part of your life, and how does that progress to where we are now?
I'll try to answer that quickly.
Okay. Thank you. Please.
It's okay that it's, feel free to tell us the long story as well.
It's a big question. So I love the gamut of like all of those art expressions. And Bogota, Colombia was the first like adventure outside of Australia I had, where I got on a plane, I flew there, 30 something hours, didn't know the people I was going to meet. It was my first invitation to paint overseas, and it was amazing because of the diversity of work on the streets there and the different way it's revered and respected. And this is what I love about it, is that it took art out of the gallery system and put it back on the streets for the people, and people were surprised by it, and you could like create something that people would walk around the corner and be like, what is that about, and have conversations and start engaging directly with your viewers and your audience in a way that the gallery system doesn't allow artists to do. And I personally really, I was shooting photos from a really early age. My dad would travel quite a bit for work, and whenever he came back, he would bring me a camera from his trips. So I would always have like a new camera to play with. I don't know, when I started, maybe like 11 or 12 years old. And I also really loved printmaking. So in particular, when stencil art started on the streets, that really that made me take notice. And a friend was friends with Banksy, and Banksy came out to Melbourne quite early on in his career. So I saw his work early 2000s probably. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. This is, he did these scissors chopping out parts of the street, and really early stuff that there isn't much documentation of it at all. But I was like, I want to be a part of this conversation. So we were having real conversations with each other on the streets, putting up something, and then the other artist would go and do it. You didn't know them, and they would put something next to yours, and you'd go back and kind of reply. And I also loved that the way it had ties to political roots. So stencil art, when you kind of trace back its history, there's a lot of early history in France from the 80s, I think in the 70s. So it had that political root that really inspired me, because I was coming from a social activist background, and it's you could make a message, you could proliferate it in the streets really quickly. Poster art is kind of similar. Wheat pasting has a similar roots. So I felt like that's where I fit in my early street persona, I guess. And
it's the hybrid of the social activism with the artist, and being able to cross over those paths and speak to an audience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I've, the arc has been long and has changed, and, it's a journey. And exactly. Yeah. And I've been in deep trust with it the whole time. And there's sort of, concurrent tracks that are going on thematically for me.
Say more about that,
I guess.
Yeah. What are those concurrent tracks?
So in it, I believe all work on the street is political, street art, because whether it's sanctioned or not, it's in this outside realm that, calls into question ownership of public space and creates new spaces by just being there. And early on in my career, before it was a career, when I was just running around the streets having fun, I was really aware of the fact that there was not many women involved. So I didn't paint with anything that would be considered feminine. I didn't use pink. And then fast forward another 6 years, when I start to decide to become an artist, pink becomes one of my iconic colors that I get recognized for, because I chose to then lean into my feminine perspective. But at the beginning, I was very undercover. People didn't know if I was a man or a woman. I loved this idea of gender neutrality in the space. But I also knew I kind of had to do that to get respect from all of the men who were doing more traditional graffiti. I didn't want to be too it's like being a Trojan horse, I guess. So, that was kind of one track going. And at the same time, I was having a lot of like psychedelic experiences, and that was also informing my work as I just discovered my own voice. I remember like distinctly deciding that, not that I didn't want to make political work anymore, but that I didn't want to be reactionary anymore, that I wanted to like create the world that I wanted to see and not be just reacting against something, but like creating something kind of new or speaking to my own, the things that I care deeply about, which, you know,
Yeah.
when we take away sort of, you know, the destruction of the natural world is the natural world, so to speak.
Yeah.
So you said, let me jump in here real quick. You said you were having you talked about the conversations with the other artists. And I'm assuming that what you mean by conversation is placing pieces of art in response to each other, right? And now taking that to what you just said about not being reactionary and creating the world that you want, how did your art change from having this like the conversation or reaction to whatever was just said to now your own voice and putting out what it is that is truly coming from within inside of you?
Well, firstly, I wasn't reacting necessarily against another artist's perspective, more against things that were happening in society at large. So an early work that I did was about immigration and refugees and detention centers. And, but, you know, we have this, you know, there was a situation in Australia with the boat people, as the government like to call them, people, illegal immigrants coming. I think, you know, it's common across colonized countries. And so I created a big piece that said, "Welcome to Australia," with like riot cops below it. And I abseiled down the wall to make it performative, to talk about access. So that was the kind of work that I was making, that was like reacting to things that were happening. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And what was the next part of the question? What did I...
How did your work change once you started realizing through your psychedelic experiences that you wanted to create the world rather than react to what's occurring?
I started to make my work more instinctually. I remember just being like, okay, what can I do that nobody else can do? What do I want to see in the world? What's my unique perspective? And really trying to find that, and realizing that a lot of our uniqueness is in our subconscious and in dream states, and yeah, meditation, psychedelics, you know, just really letting myself conjure up images and feelings, and then thinking, how do I make that into a picture that someone can have their own relationship to. So it's like it's hard to even sometimes articulate it, but I would always try and leave this space in my work for the viewer's perspective to be in it as well. So not try to have too much like, this is what I'm saying,
Right.
but like this, yeah. So really, you know, I started leaning into ideas of transformation, metamorphosis, comparative mythology, yeah, and
The
a lot of
reason,
winged creatures.
winged creatures,
Yeah.
which if you're not watching on YouTube and you're just listening, there's a phenomenal piece of work behind it. It's like two birds. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Part of my reason to ask about influence and a professional position is because of how our showing up in the world shifts when we have a realization around, I have a power available to me, a platform, I have the ears and the attention of some folks in the world, however many that may be, and wanting to use that for things that are really deeply connected to us. And so it's sort of in parallel to what Jay was asking about how your voice changed and whatnot. But I know how much your psychedelic experiences are deeply important to you, and how you want to be a voice for that, not necessarily very directly, but maybe so. I mean, leaving that space for the viewer to have their experience. But tell us more about that part of your, whether it's art or whether it's going into your coaching or your other experiences, about how that your psychedelic experiences really influenced that transformation of yourself, not just your art.
Such a
Can I add to that? I'd like to know what the psychedelic experiences that you're willing to share
Yeah.
are, so that our audience
Okay.
can have some idea about what
Yeah.
types of what you've been involved with, what's
Absolutely.
impacted.
So, yeah, I was, Melanie knows this story. Like, I was very fortunate to hear Terence McKenna speak when I was, I think, first year at university, which really influenced me at the time to start exploring the psychedelic world. And yeah, I had very transformative experiences mostly with psilocybin in those years at LSD as well. And yeah, but never trying to like grasp onto it too firmly, I guess. Like, I like to describe my artwork as being psychedelic informed. Not that I'm a visionary artist. The movement that gave me a career is the street art movement, not the visionary art movement. So those things are,
Yep.
that distinction's really important. But yeah, it's kind of always been this like undercurrent rumbling through my work that over time I would notice more and more people picking up on. That people would look at it and be like, this reminds me of, and they would tell me about their psychedelic experience. And I'd be like, oh, wow, I didn't even realize that, that I'd painted that. And then I would have these realizations. And that conversation, I think, is so beautiful and important for an artist to be in dialogue with the people seeing their work or creating those moments. I'm really interested as well as in the intersection of like dreams and psychedelics. I've always had a really, really, really active dream life that feels more real than real. So I've also drawn on that a lot. Yeah, I feel like I lost the thread of your question on the other
No,
questions.
that's okay. Yeah, I more wanted to give you space to talk about what is really important to you relative to your psychedelic experiences and your decision to be publicly advocating for plant medicine, working with them. I know it's an important thread of your current life.
Yeah.
And how when we have, and because again, Trust the Journey is a great example of that for us, in that Jay and I are professional athletes at the world level, and we have a platform and influence because of that part of our career. It's not necessarily exactly what we're doing now, but we are really dovetailing whatever influence we might have and really trying to be brave and be models around being a voice of what's true and real, which I think is really interesting too, because I do think influence and trust and that positive power comes when we actually rest into what's true for us, right? I can remember early in my skydiving career, wasn't that early, it was sort of midway, but I remember being at an event where I was coaching, and it was the standard travel to an event, be the headlining coach, and it was really a great event. But I was, in my heart, I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I was brave enough to start to share that with other people, even though I was afraid that they would not get it or reject me, or it would just be the end of my career or whatever. And I hear that in your story, in the sense that you just made a decision, like, I want to start saying what's more real and true for me. And I think that's a really big deal when people are evolving as people. So whether that's psychedelics or, anyway, I'm just sort of rambling about that concept, but I feel like that's a piece of your story that's really inspiring.
Yeah. And, it definitely, I think as we grow and we are always learning and reflecting, on our past experiences, I had this realization that, I went through like quite a traumatic experience when I was around 18 with my father passing away. And I really didn't know like how I wanted to show up in the world. Like I took a year, I went off grid, really off grid,
Wow.
and was like, do I even want to interact with a world that's really hurt me this much? And that's how I kind of found my way to art. Like, and I was already passionate about social activism from an early age. But I realized like that psychedelics as well, my experiences with that led me to realize that this was my gift. This was what I could do. This was how I could show up and give something to the world and interact with the world in a way that made me feel like I was like living my truth. And, we have like death is a great way to, or a great teacher of like, you have one life to live. Like, what are you going to do with it? So I was like, art, oh yeah, I've been doing it since I was 3. Of course, this is what I love. Yeah. And I feel like where we are now with, the psychedelic renaissance, so to speak, is this point of being able to share and talk about something that's been really underground for a long time, that I know a lot of other artists have been influenced by as well, I think for millennia, as well as modern times. And yeah, it's a really exciting time, and it makes me to be a part of that movement as well as the street art graffiti movement is, like that I can have both of those things and they cross over and intersect in a really interesting way, is a really exciting thing to be a part of, because we have this one platform to talk about what it's passionate for us. And, so psychedelics really led me to an art career as well, because they taught me about what I wanted to express and how to do it.
Nice. So I've been going to the Burning Man Festival for like 17 years now. So it's one of the places where I find myself engaging art en masse, it's a huge art. It's an art festival, right? And also grew up in a life where I was fortunate with my mother as a young boy to have put me in many arts programs. So I did a lot of sculpture and pottery and painting and art retreats and art camps, and just always had a huge appreciation. And spiritually speaking, I believe art is our highest calling, that there's no higher calling than to divinate from the source being of creation and express that through whatever medium we feel compelled to express it through. And there's this, from the picking up the first pencil crayon as a child to, visioning large scale works as a mature adult, as a mature artist. Where do you find yourself inspired? Is the daily ritual of doing, sitting down to the desk or the easel or whatever the medium is it the daily, it's just always in my routine? Or is it on like big projects or like really wanting to like make splashy explosions? Where is the fire getting its heat from these days?
Lots of different places.
Good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yes,
I always
good.
feel like as an artist, it's like we're trying to shine a light forward. If we're doing our job properly, that we're kind of distilling what's happening in the zeitgeist, like this, and then shining a path to something that maybe we don't even know what it is, but we feel called to go that way. For me, it's a lot of music, letting my like monkey mind quieten down and then seeing what bubbles up. Sometimes it's like a feeling that I really want to paint. A lot of the time I figure it out as I go. And I like yeah, and also just learning. I'm in the Psychedelics Today Vital program this year, which has been a really great source of inspiration. I love psychology. I love Jungian analysis. So drawing on that and just learning about myths, our own personal myths. I love that. The stories that we tell and why we're telling them, which I think, all of that running along as the inspiration for my art is also what's led me to, moving into the coaching world as well, because that's a big part of, how we construct our lives.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the
Very true.
Psychedelics Today group. That's how we connected. I'm a huge fan of community and connecting and showing up in spaces where I can learn, where I can connect with other like minds and hearts. I can't even express the amount of value that I have experienced in my own life and career because of doing that. And I give you credit for showing up and being like, I want to learn about this. I have this very credible, large scale success in this area that a lot of people want to hear about and always want to know about. And there's that calling toward transformation for yourself into this person who can now hold space and host events and create spaces for people to begin to engage their creative callings, their insights, and whatever you might be called to create as an experience for people. But that requires you to divert, to go away from the place where you have all this secure success. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like that's a brave act. And I don't necessarily have a question. I'm curious, did it feel brave? Does it? Do you feel like that's what you're doing? Or like, tell us more about how that experience was for you. Because for me, it felt very brave. Like I was really scared to diverge from skydiving. It's been a really long-term, like letting go of skydiving, releasing those white knuckles and, still maintaining a connection that feels right and true for me today while embracing myself as a coach and a writer and speaker and all those things. So yeah, say more about your experience if you can or want to.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thought that comes to my mind is that I get bored easily, and I've been like a bit bored with what I've been doing for a while. Sort of.
Yeah.
If bored's the right word, and it always feels like that's where the edge is. I think which you brought up earlier in our conversation, and that's what I'm always interested in is like going to the edge and bringing back what I can from that place. I'm probably naturally a little bit of a risk taker, a little bit of a self-learner. Doing something new and different, like running my art and wellness programs here at my studio in New York, it's not dissimilar to being faced with a huge mural wall and just being like, I don't know how I'm going to pull this off, but I'm going to do it. And when you don't leave yourself any place for failure, you kind of don't fail. It's a lot of pressure to put on yourself, but it's a place I enjoy being in. That's like,
I like you so much more
that
right now because of that statement. I was
I'm
like,
yep.
yes, that is it. Yep. There's no room for failure here.
And
we're just going to do it. There's no version of it that's
totally.
called failure.
Early on in my career, I did some like wildly crazy things that now I think about. I'm like, why did I put myself in that position where I had no plan to what I was painting, and just had to make it work, and then just made it work and went, wow, I can do that. That's amazing. I didn't know I could, but then realized later, I put myself in a position. And I think it was just like that early, like going into like an empty building by yourself and painting something to prove to yourself that you can do it was so fun and scary. And I've just always been drawn to those kind of experiences, which is, I think, part of the reason, we connected, Mel, because you were like skydiving. Yeah. It's like throwing yourself out of a plane. I'm like abseiling off buildings or, painting a 5-story wall without much of a plan, but a drawing on a piece of paper. Now I'm a lot more methodical with my large scale work.
Yeah,
because I've
totally.
learned all those lessons over time. But yeah, it feels super like it. That's what lights me up is like learning new stuff and also creating spaces for people to, grow and expand, and being at that stage of my career too, where I want to give back.
100%. I can very, very deeply relate to that process through my own journey of being the receiver of other people's work and being inspired as a result of it, and then making those first few attempts to kind of try to replicate some version of that. And it's usually kind of, it's very amateuristic, and then developing and giving back, getting to a point of like actually going, okay, now I'm on the other side of the coin here, and I'm actually creating the works that are inspiring others and people are receiving. So let me ask you a question, kind of in this context of like the circular journey of developing one's self. I've been playing music, DJing electronic music as my primary medium for 25 years. And that's a long time to do a form of art. And in that, there's been a diverse range of just experimentation and maturation and exploration. And also recently had a time period where I kind of went quiet, where I feel like things kind of just lulled. And that's the first time it's ever happened for me where I like, I'm taking a step away from this for a while. And those step aways, once we have a very mature skill set in something, can be really powerful for when and if we choose to step back in and how we step back in. So share with us and our audience about that, any versions of that may apply within your own career, the things that you grew and developed, and then where they may have lost their kind of energy and where they've reignited with new versions.
The sponsor of today's episode is Great Spirit Farm. Yes. Love having Great Spirit Farm with us, and specifically their ayahuasca microdose tincture. It is a natural MAOI antidepressant and anti-anxiety. Great Spirit Farm describes the feeling as a warm hug. It can help you access deep creativity, flow, intuition, and improve vivid dream recall, which actually has totally been my experience.
So what is exactly in the bottle is the ayahuasca vine itself. So this is a tincture extraction, double extraction tincture that contains the Banisteriopsis caapi vine. Now, the particular vine that this has been extracted from has been growing in Florida now for over 25 years. And the ayahuasca vine does not contain DMT, so that makes this tincture 100% legal in all 50 states.
Yeah, Great Spirit Farm recommends starting with 1 to 3 dropperfuls and increasing your dose gradually from there until you feel the effects. There are no known contradictions with antidepressants, and always check with your doctor and only take as directed.
And what's really great about what Great Spirit Farm is doing is they're making sure that 10% of all the sales are returned to the Shipibo tribe, honoring the medicine's indigenous roots with active reciprocity. Now, if you want to try this tincture out for yourself, you can go to the website that is ayadose.com, AYADOSE.com, and you can enter our discount code TTJ10 to get 10% off your order. Again, that's ayadose.com and all caps TTJ10 to get 10% off your order.
Yeah. I think that's been a constant process of, I definitely early in my career, I've really got thrust into like a career very quickly without it being a plan of mine. And I wasn't really ready for it. And it was quite challenging to be pushed into the public realm so quickly. And so there was moments where I created bodies of work that I loved, and then there was moments where I created bodies of work that I was like, wait, that's 3 different ideas going on at once, but I didn't even realize it at the time, or got caught up in ideas of what I thought I should do, and then went, and it's been so interesting because my career and everything is like self-taught, and I've consistently learned publicly. It's like,
You're
as
right.
a mural street artist, it's like so often you don't get, it's not like I get to make work in my studio and then show everybody else. Like, I'm making it in front of people on a huge scale. And now I'm leaning more into studio work, and over the last 5 years, my work's become a lot more diverse with digital and sound and paintings and a lot of different stuff. But I realized as I went on that there were these constant threads that were showing up in my work that were the pieces that I loved the most, that I cared about the most, that other people also resonated with. And that was like this thread, and I was like, and they always had ideas of like freedom and like sort of surrendering and transformation to them. And so they're the ones I always come back to. And I feel like I'm in that place again now where I'm about to, it's been a lull, and I've been, in this like study phase for like for this year, really. I did my coaching certificate in transpersonal psychology. I'm in the Vital program. The last year was a lot of self-learning, and I feel like I'm on the edge of kind of recreating a new body of work that's, well, I just said recreating. Yeah, revisiting some themes that I've always been working on. That at one point I thought, oh no, you have to kind of be done with that. And now I'm like, no, actually, I probably never will be.
The iterative process is consistently ongoing, right? Like it just goes and goes and
life.
goes.
I think there's this, I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, especially in our Western society, like there's this push forward all the time, like this like productiveness, this do the thing, go, go, go. And really we live in this world that's much more cyclical, like the tide, it draws back before it goes forward. The moon goes dark before it goes bright. And it doesn't just do that once, it does it over and over again. And I feel the same way about creativity. It's not just always a wave crashing on the beach. It's got to have a pullback. It's got to, have quiet time and space, and then reemerge.
So do you ever sneak out at night and put up some stuff that you don't tell anybody about?
I haven't for a long time, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, it's, one of the things, going back to the cyclical nature of things and the pullback, the recoil, a lot of what we talk about on the show also are our spiritual journeys and our healing journeys, and how critical that is to becoming whomever we are meant to be, as it were. But more to clear those blocks that are in our way that might require us to kind of have that more internal reclusive phase that I think for someone who is enmeshed or entrenched in this productivity Western ideology of have to be doing, or I can never let this go, I can never transform, I can never step away from this thing that's brought me success or whatever, then we're not able to heal, right? So to invite people into this idea that part of the bigger term or bigger picture, longer term success and growth is inclusive of those phases where we pull back and do reflection, self-reflection, deeper healing work. So I'm curious if and what you are willing to share about your personal spiritual path or healing journey. Like, what is a time or a story that you can share with us about when you had to do some of that deeper healing work, and what did it bring forward for you?
I think like a lot of people, I've had many moments of different types of healing, from, therapy to yoga to meditation, herbology, different modalities coming in and out of my life. I, as somebody who's a really, a lifelong self-learner, I'm always excited to figure it out on my own, if I can, and just nerd out on whatever it is that I think might help me. And, nature's just been a big part of that as well, like time in nature. And so I moved from New York City down to Tulum, in Mexico, and that was partly about that. It was about that was a big pullback of the wave of wanting to spend time more enmeshed in nature, realizing how I wanted psychedelics to show up in my life, how I could, use them to take time out to be more connected to my inner self, to the natural world around me, and how a lot of what my artwork was or is about being a bridge to that and creating a similar feeling potentially for people to come and have that kind of an experience whilst looking at a painting, hopefully, like it's like I don't want like my art's not like, oh, you're only going to get it if you've had a psychedelic experience. No, it's like and it's then I find myself back in New York City, and it's like not lost on me that I sit here like overlooking the city literally from my studio, which I'm doing right now, making these like very nature-based psychedelic paintings in this place that's devoid
the dichotomy
of nature.
Yeah, the dichotomy of that.
Yeah, but I'm like, okay, this is where it's needed,
Totally. And by the way, your studio is tremendous and amazing, and it's like inspiring on its own. 69th floor, looking out over New York City. It's a really incredible space to, I think, and I love that I almost am like the universe seems like it delivered you that experience to feel that massive juxtaposition of your thread to nature. And Jay, I know that you have such a thread of getting out into nature, that being, so I want to give you a chance to comment on that, because I imagine you have a lot to say.
Yeah.
Well, is the base jumper in me was like, what, 69th floor? Is that window open? Do you have a balcony?
I did not.
Can I can I come over for a visit?
You can come visit for sure. I welcome visitors.
I would love to.
Yeah.
I would love to. There's something about perspective. I guess, that's like the whole point of art, at least in visual arts. Perspective is everything, right? Like we're creating a depth, a point of field of vision, a point of view, some type of perspective for the viewer. And if you position yourself, or let me say, when we position ourselves at a higher perspective to the two-dimensional world that we usually live on, whether that's on the 69th floor of a building or on top of a mountain, or if we zoom in and we go on the micro or on the macro, and we get the lens focused at just a sliver of something, as above, so below, at these tiny levels. And we just see the ultimate beauty in all of it, even in a place like New York City, where it is very much created by man, which is nature, by the way. It is stunning. It is stunning to just stand there and just go like, wow, look at this, right? And inside of that, whether we're looking through a microscope at the micro world, or whether we're looking through a macro lens at the eye of a dragonfly, or whether we're looking on this huge view from the mountaintop or the top of the building, and we're taking in the awe of the skydiver's perspective, the view from above, like the grand picture of it all. We see it all happening. Accepting and see my body want to like recognizing that it's all nature, that it's all going, that it's all animate, it's all just happening, right? Whether what we think about it kind of doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what we think. Doesn't matter what the New Yorkers don't care what I think.
No, they
Right.
definitely don't.
And the ants don't care what I think when the, giant dude walks by. They probably don't even see me. I'm so big, So nature does and doesn't care what we think, but I think it reacts when we speak from that part of our soul that you were talking about earlier, where we truly resonate outward, a light of an energy. And your painting is behind your head right now is like absolutely emanating outward from all around you. And I resonate with you because I wear the same resonant energies, on my chest as my form of radiant art. And so I think I'm coming back to that same question earlier about the personal growth between speaking towards the world or speaking to the world, speaking from within. Tell me about, I can see an art piece behind you right now, one of your works. There's elements that I'm seeing when I look through your others, that there's a thread that's woven, as you said, between these particular elements. And I'd like to know more about two questions. The first question is, please educate me on what the name of the style is that has these like solid colors that are all kind of jewel-like with each other. They're kind of like the facets of a jewel, and they're creating a shape of like an animal or a being. And then secondly, where do you go when you're in the state of creation, when you're actually embodying this? And I think I'm asking this for the listener who says, I don't know how to do art. I don't know how to, they're like afraid to go into that part of themselves. Where do you go when you're listening to your soul, or you're bringing that art through to allow it to express itself? What quiets the monkey mind? What enables you to find that definition? So two different questions there.
What was the first one again? That was
what is the style like that? What's the name for the style of art?
So you mean like on the falcon head? That chair.
Yeah, so I've seen it in a few places, and I saw it in your work. It's solid color blocks that look like jewel facets, and
there's so many threads I could pull on from what you just spoke to. I will. So I feel like what you're even talking about is a psychedelic like mindset. And we don't need to necessarily have done psychedelics to embody that in the way we see the world, right?
100%.
Because through spirituality, through meditation, deep reflection, just the way we see things. Because, one of the things that was coming to mind is like, when I was a child, I used to spend a lot of time with a swimming pool, and I loved being in the pool and the feeling of weightlessness. And I used to ponder on, like, what keeps the water here? Like, why isn't it flying up into the sky? What about clouds? Thinking about particles. And I'm really inspired by, like, quantum physics and nerdy things like dark matter and consciousness. Yeah, I love it. Love that. So the shapes in my work from a very, very, very early stage were always, I was like, I want to talk about subatomic particles, but I don't know how to talk about that in my work. Because how do I draw a particle? I don't want to be that literal. And this was early on when I was like, okay, I'm going to create my own symbolic language from which to create my work. Like, how am I telling my stories? What's my narrative? What is my language? What's the language of Vexta kind of thing? And so I started using these like jewel shapes as to represent particles or quarks or whatever they are, like the tiny, tiny minutiae that makes up everything. And then going further and thinking about, okay, like, is that, what is it on the macro scale, and the similarities between, like a star and coral spawn and things like this, things in nature that are fractal by their nature. The way that, like, when you're in an aeroplane and you're looking down, and the way the rivers run is the same as, like, the blood through our veins. Those sorts of mirrors. So the jewel shapes are representative of that. So that's what that's talking to, is the matter that's making up whatever it is. So I use them in an abstract way as well as a more figurative way. And the second part of your question.
The second part of the question, I have a selfish desire to hear the answer to that question as well, because Jay is talking about his, and I say selfish, but like Tim Ferriss, one of my favorite interviewers, he's always asking guests questions that will help his creative process or his experience. I feel quite similarly. So I'm asking and curious because of I've accepted in a good, beautiful way that the word, that language is one of my main mediums. And so I'm writing more poetry, and I'm very curious to hear from any immersive creative how they get into their flow or connected to their creative process or whatever you want to share about that.
Yeah. So a few things. Something I always, talk to other creatives, or if I'm coaching somebody, I'm like, take note what gets you into that flow state. Jot it down. Is it a particular type of music? Is it when you're riding the subway? Is it when you're walking? Is it when you do have a ritual around creativity? Because then you can access it or try to access it by doing that. Is it podcasts? Is it stories? Is it quiet? What do you need before you create? Because that setting yourself up for that space is going to help you get there. And I think there's a lot of trust as well in just, finding your own unique expression. I've done quite a lot of teaching over my career, and I've been developing a particular class that I've been teaching on and off and want to try to find more time for, that's really about helping people discover their own creative voice and expression.
Amazing.
And I started with a guided meditation to sort of activate everybody's imagination, because I think whatever activates your imagination will help you to create that work. And whatever that is, source imagery, getting old school about it, like looking at magazines or finding new places to find stuff to get inspired by.
I find road trips or traveling, anytime where I'm moving across landscapes where the landscapes are changing, and I'm seeing, right now I just arrived in the Pacific Northwest and it's rich green, everything's growing, and where I was, it was dry and golden, and the complete change of the terrain, and immediately I'm inspired with the change of the natural setting to be like, oh, now I want to go deeper into this and explore into it, and it takes some time to go be in some old growth forest to really feel into what the energy of this place is. Whatever the location is, there's always some energy in it that's got some life to it. I personally, that's one of the things for me that just really lights me up and keeps that curious, intuitive, active, and wanting more.
Yeah,
definitely.
That you mentioned the coaching that you do with people, and I do want to hear more about that, as in why do people hire you? And I'm not asking so you can do your pitch in elevator. I'm not asking for that. You can give that, but it's more, I'm curious, how do you help people? What do people come to you for? Right. And you mentioned working with creatives. Is that your main person? What kind of coaching work are you enjoying doing? Is it divergent from that? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I'm, for me, this is very new. So I'm somewhat figuring it out as I go. And it's, there's so many similarities to what I do as an artist. I feel like creating the sort of coaching container is sort of the same as creating a painting that then somebody comes and has a reflective moment with, hopefully discover something about themselves that they then take away into their life. So it's I feel like I'm just doing it in a, with language and energy. and intention and pulling on threads and seeing where they go, lighting the light, shining a light. So I really, I really enjoy, it's interesting because I'm finding most of the people I work with are creatives and also have had a psychedelic experience, and integration of that experience comes into it sometimes, or sometimes that is separate.
Right.
And I've also been leaning into doing some coaching with a kind of dream focus. So clients who have an ongoing, like repetitive dream, or a dream that's really, because it's in a similar way, it's like something that needs to be integrated into their lives, or they want to unpack further. And it has so many similarities to the psychedelic experience. So I really enjoy that work as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love how you described that. Obviously, I've been a coach for 16, 17 years now. And I think the way that you describe it is so on point, as in sort of creating that container and dropping into your intuitive connection. To me, it feels absolutely, it's a flow state experience for me, and a creative one, because it feels like pure creation, because you are simply very, very present in the moment with the person and curious, being like, ooh, what's that? And then that notion of pulling on threads as it relates to coaching, but also as it relates to psychedelic integration, is so key. Love that.
I find that I like to use a lot of, I guess my speciality in a way is using metaphor. Like I'll often find it's interesting because I find it's a similar process to my art, where so people will tell me something, or I'll be, in the coaching process, and then I'll have a vision of an analogy or a metaphor, and then I'll reflect that, and then sometimes we'll use that to then like figure out the different parts. And
amazing. Perfect.
But I wanted to just speak to what you were saying, Jason.
Go ahead.
About creativity and inspiration. And I think, something I feel drawn to share is that, I think if people, people who are listening who are, wanting to be more creative and use that as an outlet and expression, whether it's part of their career or not, really just like limiting yourself is really helpful as well. Like really zooming in to something, when you were talking, I was like thinking about how I love to look at moss and get really close to leaves and things like that. So, in a world that gives us so much stimulation and so many options, it's great to just be like, actually, I'm just going to use black and white and this one thing and see where that goes, because then it enables you have to work a little harder to sort of tap into it.
So, for the last number of years of my life, as my professional career, I worked as creative director for a company that I co-founded, and my art director is absolutely fabulous artist and one of my dearest friends. And he also comes from the graffiti world in Paris, actually, from 25 years ago, Benjamin Ford. And we've had this conversation at length about how powerful doing it with less is, about putting limiters on the scope of how you can do something. Let's say, okay, for example, like how can we tell the story using only red and white that's the only two colors we can use, and we need to do this whole thing that way. And those limiters, they pull like how that, we're going to have to get creative, right? Like, how can we do this with just this, versus the world that we're often exposed to these days is infinite. Like, oh my God, if I open up Adobe Illustrator, I'm just like overwhelmed, right? Like there's just so many options, Photoshop, so many options, and I'm just using digital. If I open up a palette of paint and there's 10,000 colors to choose from, well, which one do I even know to start with, right? Like how now I'm overwhelmed in choices, but if I only have 3 colors, oh, this is a lot easier. I can just pick one of the 3 and just start. I love what you just leaned into there. It's that's such a helpful piece of advice. Thank you for bringing that to us.
I think the element of play is so important. There's scientific studies about play and neural plasticity and changing our brains through being in a more playful state. And creativity has this element of play to it that it should have, I think, because there's freedom in that. And I really learnt that through teaching children, because I learned that if I gave them every color, the work didn't usually end up very good. But if I limited them, sometimes they were a bit challenged, but at the end, and I'm also coming from a subjective viewpoint here, obviously, I felt like the work they were making was better. And I went, oh. And they were having an easier time if they only had 4 colors to choose from instead of...
Yeah.
I was totally that kid. I was like, when you mix all the colors, what color does it make?
Yeah, does it make rainbow?
Yeah.
I was literally just yesterday talking to a friend about how adults sort of lose that connection to play, and how when we reconnect to it, how that's a real level up move, which seems counterintuitive. It seems averse to what quote unquote success or being professional is, but I very intentionally bring humor, comedy, ridiculousness into my coaching work so that people are given permission to play more, to laugh more, to find the lightness and the levity in this ridiculous human experience. Listen, we could talk forever. I feel like every time, and we got to hang out again, because
of course,
we said this when we first met, like let's get some more time. But what have we not touched on that you really want to make sure that we share? We have plenty of time, no pressure on time, but if there's anything we didn't cover that you want to cover, let's hear it.
I don't know. Nothing's really coming to mind. Would probably think about it, later. I'll be like,
later, and you're like, oh, I should have said that. No. I mean, you've already given us so much value. Jay, do you have any other questions that before we close?
There's a statement in my head that says, "Spill the paint."
Spill the paint,
right? Like spill the paint. In with what Melanie was referring to as far as being playful and being in that kind of curious, well, I don't know what I'm doing, or I do know what I'm doing. Either way, allowing ourselves the space to be creative means making mistakes. And I think I just wanted to speak to this really quickly from my own musical career, is that I've often spent infinite amounts of time working to perfect a particular piece and practicing until I'm like, okay, I have every movement, I have all the structure, I've got all the notation, it's all in place. And then when you perform it, there's always a splatter, right? Like one thing here, one thing there is always just a little bit not what I planned. And I just got a whole bunch of fresh tattoo work and a little bit not like this is a little not like I thought it was going to be, but it's always perfect in the end, right? Like it's always the way that it's meant to be. So I think I just wanted to pick up on that note from Mel, because I think as artists that it can be intimidating to feel okay with the idea of spilling the paint, right? And kids don't.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely. It's, I intentionally a long time ago was like, if I'm going to hold up particular creatives as somebody I look to, I want them to be the people who aren't afraid to make mistakes publicly,
Amazing.
Like Dennis Hopper was an early one where I was like, he's a patron saint of my studio. Patti Smith. But yeah, it's, when you were talking, I was thinking about, I feel like, life is this constant coming home to ourselves, right? And when we're children, we are very much at home in ourselves because we have less awareness of how we're perceived, or, we haven't had things programmed on top of us by society at large. So yeah, I think as we are on this journey of sort of forgetting who we are, remembering, coming back to ourselves all the time. And, when we enter a sort of a playful, childlike state, we're tapping back into that, so it's like, it should be important. And I love that the neuroscience is pointing to how positive it is, because, then it's like the science says so as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just
understand.
100%.
Much like psychedelics, how there's so much anecdotal evidence to the healing nature and the positive experiences that people have had. Of course, they're not a panacea. There are risks, all those things. But the anecdotal evidence is so overwhelming. But now that we're finally getting a little bit more research behind those anecdotes and those stories that support the notion of psychedelics for healing or creativity or inspiration, it's important. It's important. And so play is the same thing. There's science behind it, so we can trust it a bit more. So it's interesting, all of that. But my friend, how can people follow you? What can we point them to? How can they support you online or elsewhere? You tell us.
Where can we find your work?
I'm probably most active. I'm most active in terms of social media on Instagram. You can find me at Vexta. You can also sign up for my newsletter through my website, which is vexta.com.au for Australia. If people are in New York, I host my art and wellness series, and they can also come to me for transformative and mindset coaching.
Thank you so much.
Amazing.
You are incredible.
Amazing.
Thank you for all that you gave us and everyone today.
My pleasure.
You can expect a visit on my next time into New York. I will definitely come.
Yes, both.
Yeah, I'm getting closer to a New York trip.
Oh my God, I'm so excited.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Much love, sister.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, seriously, for listening, for spending your valuable, valuable time, energy, and heart with us. Every bit of it makes a difference.
Yeah, thank you. We would love it if you could show your support for the show by subscribing on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, or follow us on Instagram. You can always click the like button, leave us a comment, or share an episode with somebody directly.
Like we mentioned, every month we host integration coaching circles. So much good work is happening there. You are invited to join us. Go to trustthejourney.today/integration. The Trust the Journey family includes these integration coaching circles and our private Facebook group where we connect and support each other. Join us by going to our website, trustthejourney.today, and click the orange Patreon button.
Yeah, thanks. It's your support and engagement that make the show possible. Thank you. We're here to connect with you. Feel free to DM us anytime on Instagram. We're at trustthejourney.today. Thank you. We love you.
We love you.
Keep laughing, keep loving, and keep trusting the journey.